Welcome everybody. It's Darlene McLennan here, and on behalf of Attend and ADSET, I would like to welcome you to this webinar. We're excited to have Debbie Hindle presenting to us today on the new resource, How to Transition to Tertiary Education, Helpful Hints for People with Autism. Debbie, I just might get you to change to the next slide.
Next. Here it is.
Thank you. So how to transition to tertiary education, helpful hints for people with autism. This this resource was launched last week in Hobart, and we hope that the resource will improve the journey and experience that students on the spectrum have within further education. It has been a delight to have been able to work with Debbie again, and I hope that she and the advisory committee that advised us on the resource are very proud of the great work they've done. Just wanting to do a few housekeeping items for those who are joining us for the first time for a webinar. The webinar is live captioned by Roxanne from Bradley Reporting and will be recorded. The recording will be placed on ADSET in the coming week. There are some downsides to the GoToWebinar platform, and we apologise for this. There are some accessibility issues for screen readers. All participants have been muted. This is to ensure as little background noise is received during the webinar. Debbie will speak for 40 to 45 minutes. Throughout the presentation, feel free to enter your questions in the question pod and box, and I will ask those questions of Debbie at the end. Sorry if we don't get to them all. Just a reminder for the participants who are screen reader users that have joined us today, if you do have any questions, you can email Jane Hawkeswood and she will pass those questions on to me. If you also have any technical difficulties during the webinar, Jane is on standby. So that is jane.hawkeswood, HAWKESWOOD at utas.edu.au. Okay, now I will hand over to Debbie to start her presentation. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, Darlene. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to everyone here and those who this is their first webinar. This is my first webinar too, and presenting at my first webinar for ADSET. I feel like I'm in an exam condition, so but it'll be a great outcome, and it's been an absolute privilege to work on developing this resource. I was a project officer employed by the National Disability Coordination Officer program. This afternoon's presentation will go through briefly the rationale for why we developed this resource, where it came from, a little bit about the process, but I won't debrief you even though I have a need to, or I won't debrief with you. Then I will go through and give an overview and some examples that I've drawn from the resource to enable you to get a feel for what it can do and the approach that we took. Next slide. So we know anecdotally, and the research tells us, that there are increasing numbers of students with autism spectrum disorders enrolling and participating at university and TAFE, and this seems to be a pattern not only in Australia but in the United Kingdom and America as well. Next slide. Students with autism spectrum disorders find these learning environments, so at university and TAFE, to be unpredictable, illogical, noisy, and populated with people who communicate unclearly and are unreliable. And we know that many, next slide, and we know that many students with ASD experience a number of challenges transitioning to the tertiary learning environment. These often include, but aren't limited to, understanding the context of the new environment, so it's very different from what they've experienced in high school. Time management, they are now in an adult learning environment and need to manage their time and their study priorities themselves. social relationships, and that includes peer, academia, teaching staff, administration staff. Along with that is communication, asking for additional assistance, knowing who and where to ask, and getting stuck and unable to raise the concerns. Sometimes they become more and more anxious when they get stuck, and then it can become somewhat of a downward spiral. Next slide. And research does indicate there can be a tendency for students with ASD to be reluctant to seek additional support for their studies, have difficulties articulating their needs, what help they would need, when they would need help, and decline initial offers of support. There's a number of reasons for this. Sometimes it's an experience of being bullied or victimised within school. There's a fear of being labelled. There's a hope that they can do things, that they can be an effective student without additional assistance. Next slide. And I know from being an NDCO and working closely within a university environment that by the time a student is struggling, damage has often already been done in terms of academic development, mental health and general well-being. I also know from working with a number of ex-students with ASD saying to me that they just needed something, a guide, so that they knew when their studies were at risk and when they should ask for help. It's a bit about when the wheels are about to fall off, just needing some pointers about that. Next slide. And we know that when students are given appropriate and timely support, they are more likely to succeed in their studies. And again, as an NDCO and working across university and TAFE, that there are many examples of individuals, support staff and teaching staff that have developed effective strategies in supporting students with ASD in their studies. So we wanted to capture and share some of what works well, and we also wanted to assist students to develop a good strategy or good strategies to doing well and identify when to seek extra assistance. Next slide. Hence, this resource was born, and it's been made possible by NDCO special project funding to develop this resource. And as I said, it really came from wanting something so students could identify when the wheels may be falling off, and to develop some good strategies for themselves and to know when and where and how to seek additional support. We established an advisory committee from around Australia to inform the project, and we also worked with a number of individuals with ASD to provide feedback and input into what the resource could include. And I thank them, and on behalf of the NDCOs in Tasmania, we all thank them generously for sharing their expertise and helping make the project a reality. Without their input and support, not sure what would have happened, but we wouldn't have got such a great resource that we have now. I'll just list very briefly some of the people who provided input so you get a feel for what expertise we drew upon. Now this is for our advisory committee. Mary Brake is an autism consultant with the Tasmanian Department of Education. Sean Corcoran is Disability Liaison Coordinator in Victoria TAFE. Marita Faulkner is postdoctoral fellowship with Autism CRC and also works at Curtin University in WA. Sue Hancock and Julie Harrison are both with Australian National University, ANU, and have developed a wonderful mentoring program. Colleen Hooper is the National Disability Coordination Officer in Southern Tasmania with Mission Australia. Belinda Karp has been doing some great work in New South Wales TAFE. She's a teacher consultant for students with disability and has developed a number of transition programs. And Amanda Richdale is a Principal Research Fellow at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre through La Trobe University. And the Olga Tennyson website is a great place for lots of information, and they've done some great work with families and individuals. I should just mention before I go on the name of the book. We've actually named it what it is in line with, we think that people on the spectrum can just identify with what it is, so no fancy name. But we deliberated a lot about what we call the Autism Spectrum Disorder. There was some thought about autism spectrum condition, and we know that some people on the spectrum really identify with that. But in the end, some of the individuals that we put it out to identified much more with the terminology Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD, so that's what we have used in this resource. So I apologise up front to anyone who may want to label that differently, but we have gone with ASD. Next slide. And there it is. So how to transition to tertiary education, helpful hints for people with autism spectrum disorder. And it does provide helpful hints and strategies on making the transition to tertiary studies. It provides advice on how to succeed in tertiary studies. It will help students identify early warning signs that things are not going well and when they may need to seek additional advice and support. And we provide information about the types of support services and learning support at university and TAFE. Next slide. We believe this book will increase self-determination by assisting students to better understand their new learning context and learning environment, identify when and what supports could be helpful, and encouraging them to seek additional support when necessary. Next slide. By the way, a lot of the images and on the current slide, for those who can see it, the circle with contents in it and drawn from the booklet, so our graphic designer did a great job there. In the process of developing the resource, the long resource, and I'll go through it in a little bit and compare the two of you, but in the short of it, we developed two resources, a long version and a short version. And that's because the long version contains a lot of information that we think will be really helpful to a number of individuals and also to practitioners and to families, but we'll also receive the feedback that for some individuals on the spectrum that it could be just too cumbersome, too large, and in the words of a wonderful young woman who I mentor who's on the spectrum, it contained a lot of fluff, if you like. So we have a defluffed version, a shorter version. But both editions include information on characteristics of people with and without ASD. That was something that the committee thought was really important, some of that self-awareness. Identifying and using strengths, skills and talents. We know that all individuals, and definitely individuals on the spectrum, have a number of strengths, skills and talents that they would have used already through their learning. So identifying and using those in a new learning context is really important for resilience and mental well-being and helps with the transition. Contains information about the learning context, modified the differences between high school TAFE and university table that is available in other places in ADSET, advice on organising studies, communication tips, information on disclosure, advice on managing stress and anxiety, because we know that a lot of people on the spectrum experience this, has lots of handy checklists and practical worksheets. Next slide. So, comparison between our long edition and our short edition. And we were lucky to be able to stretch the budget to be able to produce both. So just briefly, the long edition is 66 pages compared to the short edition 22 pages. Still couldn't quite get it down under 22, but 22 pages it has. The long edition has a lot more information at the end of each chapter, has bibliography and a list of other useful resources. Didn't include that in the short edition. Also, the long edition have questions and answers at the end of each chapter, and it has case studies throughout. So we've actually added, those real people scenarios throughout, and in particular, we know that disability practitioners will find these really helpful. There is a checklist after the final chapter, one checklist that people can go through and tick when they've done things, whereas the shorter edition, we've actually been able to put useful little checklists at the end of each chapter, so just 2 or 3 points for people to tick. The long edition has a chapter for parents. This provides advice on supporting their child in an adult learning environment. It has a full bibliography, lots of interactive exercises and activities, and has been designed in an easy flip style layout. Whereas a short version, no chapter for parents. We didn't include the bibliography, but we have put in some interactive exercises, and we've actually laid it out, managed to condense it down so there is a chapter on each page, or a chapter to a page, for ease of copying and giving out to students. Next slide, which just will cover very briefly chapter 2 and 3, which is awareness of yourself and others and knowing your strengths and challenges. Next slide. So as mentioned before, we developed a table to compare some key characteristics of people with and without ASD. But saying that, I just want to mention that we're really mindful to respect the individuality and differences of people, and that was one of the challenges of developing a resource such as that everyone is very different. Everyone can experience their autism in very different ways, and to know one person with autism is to simply know one person with autism. But we also needed to I suppose highlight some particular issues that some people, and challenges, and also some strengths that some people with autism have. And in the talent, skills and character strengths, we encourage people to identify those, and there are some of the exercises. And we put those in the context of tertiary study. Next slide. The next chapter is about the campus, knowing the campus, and it really works on the premise of being forewarned about what to expect can assist people in a new environment. So we've tried to provide as much information to help people be forewarned about what to expect. We've added some little interesting ideas, as well as, downloading the campus map, visiting beforehand either in group open days or as individuals. Also picked up one tip about taking a photo, so using your mobile phone these days, which all has photo capacity, and take a photo of yourself in a certain location, and then take it home and put it on the wall, and then that can help you really put yourself in that context. The other thing that's emphasised is to encourage people to find a de-stress area, so somewhere that will be quieter, that they can feel comfortable with, that if they're feeling anxious or stressed, that they can go to this area at any time. I want to mention on the bottom of this slide I've got uni accommodation. We know that for some universities such as ANU, many students reside in university accommodation, but we acknowledge that this resource didn't have the capacity the length, the time that was needed to dedicate to something such as university accommodation. So we've just touched on it very briefly. Okay, I'm moving to the next slide. I just want to read you Gillian's story, which is an example of a case study in the booklet. So, Gillian was enjoying her TAFE studies and all was going well until she arrived at her classroom one day and found a note on the door indicating that due to the necessity of carrying out unexpected maintenance to the room, classes would be held in an alternative location. She was unsure where the new room was located and felt stressed about trying to find it before the class was due to start. She wandered around the building and was becoming agitated. Another student asked if she was okay and needed help to find the room, but Gillian was not able to respond. Gillian decided to go to her de-stress area, a seat in a quiet area of the library. She sat quietly there and practiced some deep breathing relaxation techniques. After 15 minutes, she felt much calmer. She decided to email her teacher to make a time to discuss any information covered in the class she missed and to ask for directions to the new classroom. So in the case studies, we generally may have highlighted something that many students experience and then provide a solution. Okay, I'll move to the next slide, which is really just a chapter introduction on studying at university or TAFE. And I'll just move to the next slide. So in the studying at university or TAFE section, as I mentioned before, we have included the differences between studying at high school and uni or TAFE. And we know that many students find this really helpful. We've included an area for my ideal study space, and this was one of the inclusions from a student on the spectrum, and space is provided to write or draw what an ideal study space would look like, would sound like, would include. We've talked about the online systems, the library, assessments, online discussions or blogs, group assessments, and mentioned also whether to be a full-time or part-time student. We know that many students with disability and many students on the spectrum can transition much more easily into tertiary education if they take on a part-time study load. With the assessments, we've actually talked about when they work well and also if there are challenges to talk to someone about them. But group assessments, for example, we know that group assessments work well, and I will just read from the resource, page 26. Group assessments work well when tasks are allocated fairly and evenly between group members. The group establishes clear timelines for completion of tasks. Everyone in the group is clear about the process. Members know how to best contact each other, and the group meets regularly to discuss work in progress. We've also said that a good strategy when working as part of a group is to identify two components of the group task that match your skills and your interests, and propose to the group that you take responsibility for one or both of these areas. That was a great tip out of a Succeeding in College with Asperger's Syndrome, a student guide from the UK. Okay, next slide I've moved on to, which is organising your study. And this was the largest section of the resource. So the next slide talks about students who are well organised and have good study techniques are more likely to succeed in their studies. So we provide practical tools in the way of weekly planners and semester planners. We've broken assessment task activities into 5 stages, and each of those stages can be mapped onto a semester planner. We've encouraged people to do to-do lists. We talk about effective studying techniques, so studying in chunks of time for 1 hour, finding a quiet time, and we put a lot of preparation for exam information. I'll move on to the next slide, which is an example of a weekly planner. So the example is colour-coded so people can see at a glance what they need to do for each subject. We've also built time in for families and friends, just free time, some gym, and some fun time, because we know that being at university is more than just studying. We also encourage people to review that weekly plan each week, and we provide some questions to help them review it, and we would encourage people, if they find they're not sticking to their weekly plan, then to seek some additional help, and to take the plan with them when they seek additional help, so it's a good basis to start with. The next slide gives an example of a semester planner. So we've provided examples of this again. This is part of what's in the resource, so it gives 2 subjects. It breaks down those assignments in the 5 stages. So well, the first stage is understanding the question, then researching, writing up a draft, reviewing the draft, and submitting. So we encourage people to transfer some of these tasks from their semester planner onto their weekly plan. Blanks of these are available online too. Move to the next slide. Sorry, I'm just checking my time. Going fine, I think. Support services. So this is really encouraging people to access those support, to understand what support services are there and to access them if they are required. I know that disclosure is a personal decision, and there are pros and cons for each side, but saying that we have encouraged people and emphasised the benefits of disclosing. And we've provided a table for examples of what assistance and study supports are available. So it's more than just highlighting deficits or challenges. It's really saying, it's giving some concrete examples of what people may find challenging or difficult and what solutions are available at the moment. So here's an example. I've moved to the next slide and have given you an example of a question and answer. So there are 2 question and answers generally at the end of each chapter. So this is a question: I'm enrolled at university full-time doing 4 subjects. I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed by the workload. Someone has suggested that I withdraw from 1 subject and only study 3 subjects. Is this advisable? And we've provided the answer. If you find that studying 4 subjects is overwhelming, it is advisable to study 3 subjects. You will still be regarded as a full-time student. Studying 3 subjects will give you more time to become familiar with the requirements of tertiary study. It therefore can be a good idea for the first 1 or 2 semesters. You can always decide to increase your enrolment to 4 subjects in subsequent semesters. However, it is important to know that if you drop a subject after the university census dates, there will be academic penalties and a financial cost for the subject. We tried to give a concise answer to what could be a complex issue. We've actually also tried to balance our case studies and our question and answers with university and TAFE stories. Moving on to the next slide. We encourage students to find 1 or 2 go-to people on campus, so people they can go to help with questions that they may have about their studies or life in general. For some of these, so we've outlined the role of the disability support staff, transition support staff, counselling, learning support and student mentors if they are available. We've also emphasised that many students can seek support from some of these services, not just students with a disability and not just students on the spectrum. Next page. There is a chapter on communication tips. We know that I'm aware that this is a big area and it's one of the significant challenges identified by students with ASD at university and TAFE and in life in general. What we've done here is give some information and some useful tips for the context of university and TAFE study. So we've talked about what lectures are, what are the communication rules in lectures, and how to communicate best with your lecturers. We've also done the same for small classes and tutors or teachers. And we've outlined those questions or tried to answer those questions. When do I start talking in classes? How long do I talk for? When do I stop talking? What topics are okay for discussion in the group? And how and when do I ask questions? Feedback is that for many they can either be fearful of talking at all or can dominate some of the class discussions. We've also given some hints about communicating with peers, but look, again I'll just state I know this is a large area and there have been a number of books just focusing on communicating and we just wanted to provide some advice for this learning context. It was too big an area not to do that. Okay, the next slide gives a story about Rachel and communicating with her lecturer. So Rachel had a question about an assignment that she was having trouble with. She could not do any more work on that part of the assignment until she had clarification on what to do. Each time she went to the lecturer's office, the door was closed. The deadline for the assignment was coming up soon, so she was getting worried. There was a timetable on the lecturer's door showing 2 time slots for student consultations, but unfortunately these both clashed with other lectures. She sent the lecturer an email outlining her question. The lecturer replied the next day with a short answer to the question and offered to make a time to meet later in the week if more information was required. Rachel started work on the assignment and then took it to the lecturer at the agreed time to get some feedback and to make sure she was on the right track. She was then able to finish the assignment on time. Next slide is about managing stress and anxiety. Again, we've touched on a subject that can be huge and a subject of a resource or a book all on its own. But we wanted people to identify the physical symptoms and also what that could feel like. So we've talked about stress, anxiety and panic attacks, and for people to know that there are healthy and unhealthy levels. We can all feel stressed in study. The next slide talks about encouraging students to find 2 or 3 techniques to use to manage stress and anxiety, and encourages students to do these in times when they are feeling okay. So when they're not, then they already have a strategy that they can use. So we cover relaxation techniques, training your thoughts, and the Fabic behaviour scales. We're aware of cases that this has worked very well. Caring for yourself and getting additional help. So training your thoughts, I'll just go back to that, covers mindfulness. It covers things like remembering the 3 good things that happen each day, using your imagination to visualise pleasant thoughts or memories, and when experiencing or if experiencing a panic attack, remember to tell yourself that it's not life-threatening. The anxiety won't hurt me even if it doesn't feel good. And caring for yourself aims for, people can aim for at least 30 minutes of exercise each day, avoiding some of those high caffeine foods that can be triggers, and aiming to do something you enjoy at least once every day. The Fabic behaviour scale is I'm reading here from the short resource too, so I get the words right, is a visual chart to help change unwanted behaviours that are caused by anxiety. And the scale uses faces and colours to help people identify how they react and feel as their anxiety level increases, and then it teaches appropriate behaviours to manage stress and anxiety. It gives a language, an easy language to use around anxiety and stress, and that language can be shared with others, and there is a case study also talking about that. Okay, moving to the next slide. Information for parents, we have included a chapter in the long version only. We've defluffed the short version and left it out. But we wanted to put it in the long version because we know that parents do play a significant positive part in transition. And the parenting role does change as a child becomes an adult and moves to an adult learning environment. We encourage early planning, and we've also emphasised that parents need to respect the requirements of the university and TAFE to require consent, and usually written consent, before people can talk to them about their son or daughter. Okay, next page. So that's a resource, and it does a lot. We're really proud of what we've been able to do in this resource. But we also acknowledge that this resource is only part of the picture. We know that there is also a need for much more understanding, respect and valuing the ASD perspective and all that that perspective can provide into the learning environment. We also know that there often is a need for more proactive support services that are flexible and responsive to the needs of individuals, that are available up front without the person needing to ask for them. And also more responsive learning and teaching environments. The resource, where do you get it? Hard copies will be sent to National Disability Coordination Officers around Australia, or it can be downloaded from ADSET, from Autism-Transition page there. And in fact, thanks to Darlene McLennan and Jane Hawkeswood for their work on uploading this. Jane has done a marvellous job. It looks amazing. She has actually not only put each resource there in full to be downloaded and printed if you wish. She's broken these resources into chapters so you can download just a chapter, and she's included the worksheets as well. And what we hope to do is to work together and put more resources up there as some are developed. Any questions? And thank you for listening, and I hope I've still got all my virtual audience out there, but I'm happy to take questions now.
Thanks, Deb. That's absolutely wonderful. So we've received one question in regards to Julie Harrison. So she was the person that developed the successful mentoring program for students with ASD,
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, their participation assistant program.
Okay.
Which now from memory, and gee, it'd be nice if Julie or Sue were online, or Susan were online, but ANU have a program where they use participation assistants to support new students on the spectrum into their university. Given that most of their students also reside in university accommodation, the participation assistants are students who have knowledge or experience with someone on the spectrum. Sometimes it can be a family member or another relative. They're provided training, and they are paid to work with those students in that first semester. And to help with things such as time management, understanding the learning context, knowing who to ask, when to ask, how to ask, finding your way around places. They also can work with accommodation to help troubleshoot any problems there.
That's great. Well, maybe it might be a good future webinar that we can get Julie that to do. Now, a couple of other questions. Yep.
Can I also say that Julie and Susan have been great inputters into the resource, and they love it. And Julie is about to go to America in a couple of weeks and present some of the work that they've been doing at ANU, and we'll be spruiking our resource too. I think it's great. Fantastic.
Now, just one of the other questions is, how much does a book cost from the NDCO?
Oh, it's free.
Very good.
It's a freebie. But you are sending, Darlene is sending 30 copies of the long and the short one to each NDCO. So it could be a case of first in, first served. Yeah. They'll have 30 copies each.
Yep. When students come to the Disability Service Officer, we can then put the support in place. Have you got any suggestions of how we reach those who are struggling in silence?
It would, good one. I think what also needs to be included here is some autism awareness for staff, that they could possibly look for some of the indicators or signals, and then encouraging students by having this resource around or freely available. This resource will also be really helpful, I think, not only for students on the spectrum, but some of the approaches for students who are experiencing anxiety, depression, other mental health conditions, and actually for any student really, some of the planning and the time management. I want to talk to my son about it. I need to show my son.
Actually, yeah, I was thinking that when I thought of that too when the stress stuff you're talking about. That I was like, I must have one fun activity a week, a day. I mean,
a day.
So we've just got some positive comments to Debbie about that the resource will be a wonderful addition to the programs that people have. We've also got.
Thank you for that.
also about what is a reasonable level of support. You know, sometimes with universities and TAFEs, you know, in that adult environment, there's an expectation that students come ready to study, and sometimes, you know, there's been a challenge between, you know, people not wanting to over-support. So how much should staff provide to students on the spectrum? How much support?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? And I know there's lots of research being done on the types of support and what best works with people on the spectrum. The spectrum is very interesting. You know, the support needs of people with the spectrum can be very complex and can require very individual approaches, and despite their skills and capacity in knowledge and expertise about particular areas, that they can struggle with, you know, those day-to-day things, and it is part of their disability, and it is something that is required for them to be effective learners, especially in a new learning environment. And it could be that that up front, the support provided is loaded up front in that first semester, a bit of a semester, to enable that student to be comfortable in the new learning environment, to be less anxious, and then they'll be more effective students, and I would think that the supports then could be tailored off. But I think there is growing awareness that we do need to do things differently, and we'll keep exploring how we do them. And I don't know how you say how much do we need. It's I think with people on the spectrum it's a very different approach. The nature of the disability calls for a very different approach.
Yeah,
and it's not that pastoral care. Can I just get back to the information, follow up with the question around Julie and Susan's program at ANU, for that, and you can download it or look on ADSET at the resource in the bibliography. It's under McLeod and Harrison, assisting students with Asperger's syndrome to transition more smoothly into academic life at university and into university accommodation. So there is a paper there that outlines that, but look, I'm sure Julie and Susan would also be happy to share. I know they are happy to share.
Very good. We've got quite a few questions, so we'll try to be quick just to try to get to as many as we can. We have students who have a real difficulty in identifying if the time and the work they're putting into uni is sufficient to actually pass. This possibly also overlaps with the issue of students not identifying that they may need to change something or access supports. Is this covered, or do you have any additional suggestions?
So knowing how much time to put in to a particular study. I don't think we've covered that in particular. I mean, what we have done is, and we have mentioned a few times, things don't have to be perfect before you hand them in, because I think for some people they can concentrate on it being perfect. We've emphasised that you're better off to have things in on time. I think what we have done is we've just we've emphasised that planning on a semester basis and planning week to week, and breaking down, say, written assignments into stages. No, this is what you have to do. Put it in a weekly planner, and really work to your weekly planner, and concentrate on getting the assignments in on time. We also, though, do mention, as far as time, we do mention that rule of thumb that it is, you know, for every hour of face-to-face time, there's at least another hour of private study time. But it is also important for people to balance things and have fun, have a life.
One of the other questions is, staff in a program want us to run a session for the peers of a student with ASD in class. What are your thoughts about the appropriateness of this?
Is the student in agreement? That would be the first question.
Well,
Can the student contribute to that? Can you use those positive and strengths of being on the spectrum, the I can. The foreword was written by a woman called Penny Robinson, who's part of the I Can network, which focuses on what people on the spectrum can do and do well. So if you could use some of that approach, so it's not just a deficit one, but I think, and some other research I'm doing, is that if you can inform peers of what it is like to be on the spectrum in all those great strengths and abilities, but also some of the challenges, it's only going to increase the understanding and acceptance. And if the student, I would think it would be really important for the student to be involved in that in a really proactive and positive way.
Yep. Just a few questions coming in regards about improving teachers and academics' knowledge around autism. Is there anything that you could suggest that could pass on to teachers to enhance their knowledge of autism?
I think this resource, can I say that? Look,
yeah.
This resource is going to be very helpful for not only the students with autism and their parents and transition staff and disability practitioners, but also for other staff in the institutions at university and TAFE. And for example, the characteristics of people on the spectrum and people not on the spectrum, or people with ASD and people not with ASD, on page 11 and 12 of the long resource, and some page in the short resource, is a great way of just really comparing up front. It's a really great awareness thing, not only for people with ASD but for others. So I think this resource is a good starting point to start having those conversations about what it means to with ASD, and there'd be lots of other resources I'm sure that maybe the disability practitioners could support with, the local or the state autism societies.
Yep. The other question that's probably goes alongside that one is there any resources you know about how to break down academic tasks to students? Is there any guides or?
No, and I think, look, at this resource started, but we were covering university and TAFE in the whole gamut of what courses are there, and we're also covering the gamut of what it could be for being on the spectrum. So it is general, it has to be. We did 66 pages as it was. But I would think a good place to start would be with the student or with the specific course, and maybe work with maybe the student learning or some of the academic staff within that course to break down specifically with that specific course. That would be my suggestion. I mean, I have broken down assignments into 5 stages, and exams have been broken down into how do you study for exams as much as possible to generalise it. But sometimes we just need to really make things very specific for the specific student, the specific context.
Yeah, just one. Probably just have this as the last question: is what role do you think social media can play in getting messages in the book out to students with ASD?
In getting this message out.
Yeah.
That's a good question. What role can social media play in getting this? Is it on the NDCO Facebook site, website?
It has been promoted. It's on AdSet. Yeah, but I mean, maybe it reminds us that there are a lot of autism-specific pages that we could post to and get those discussion out. So,
that would be good. I mean, this resource is freely available. It's available on AdSet for anyone to download, to copy, to use, however they want to use. The fantastic thing about NDCO special project funding is that they, and thank the Department of Education for this, is they do fund projects, resources that are funded to be available to people free of charge and use however they want to use. So I'd love to know that how people are using it. I'd be happy, and I'm sure the NDCO program, Darlene, and AdSet would be happy for it to to be promoted, however, and to hear some stories back from how people are using it. We'd love to hear that.
Excellent. Well, we might finish up now. I'd just like to thank Debbie. Just a reminder that it is on AdSet. It's, you had the URL before, but also that you can actually find it on AdSet as well under Students with Disability. It's the last drop down in that area. And as Debbie said, you can print off blank forms to give out to students as practitioners when you're sitting, with a student, give them a new timetable, give them the time management tools, which is great. The other thing we haven't let Debbie know is Jane's also worked really well in putting the resource into the free publishing website issue, and we'll have that up on AdSet soon, so people will be able to download it as an ebook for their iPads or their other tablets and so forth as well. So thank you everybody for joining us. As we said, the video of this will be up on AdSet in the next week. Thank you for Bradley reporting for their captioning, and thank you for everybody giving their time. And we will close the webinar now and let you get on with your day. Thank you.
Thank you.